Hello, and welcome to this quiet place. You've arrived at a moment where the day can finally soften, where the noise of the world begins to fade, and where we can turn our attention to something small, intricate, and deeply calming. Tonight, we're going to explore the gentle world of ant colonies, those hidden civilizations beneath our feet, and the beautiful ways in which cooperation unfolds in the smallest of lives. You can let your shoulders soften if you'd like. Your breathing can slow. There's no hurry here, no urgency. We have all the time we need to wander through these ideas together, and you are welcome to drift wherever feels most comfortable. Perhaps you had a long day. Perhaps your mind is still turning over thoughts that don't need turning. That's perfectly natural. But here, in this space, you can set those thoughts down gently, like stones beside a quiet stream. They'll be there if you need them, but for now, they can rest. If these quiet journeys bring you comfort, you're welcome to return anytime. There are many gentle stories waiting, many soft facts that can help the mind unwind. But tonight, we begin with ants, and with the remarkable, calming truth that cooperation is written into the very fabric of their existence. So let us step softly into their world and see what we might discover. Ants have been on this earth for a very long time, longer than we might imagine when we see them crossing a kitchen counter or trailing along a garden path. They first appeared somewhere around 100 million years ago, during the age of dinosaurs, when the world was warmer and the continents were still drifting into the shapes we recognize today. Back then, in the middle of the Cretaceous period, the first ants emerged from wasp-like ancestors, trading solitary lives for something far more intricate: life together. And they have been refining that togetherness ever since. Over millions of years, through countless generations, ants have developed ways of living that are so finely tuned, so deeply cooperative, that they seem almost like a single organism spread across many bodies. This is not cooperation born of conscious decision or moral choice. It is cooperation woven into instinct, into chemistry, into the very structure of their lives. And there is something profoundly calming in that, something that asks us to consider how connection can exist without conflict, how order can arise without command. There are more than 12,000 known species of ants in the world, and scientists believe there may be many more yet to be discovered. They live on every continent except Antarctica, in nearly every habitat you can imagine: rainforests and deserts, mountains and plains, cities and wilderness. Wherever there is soil, wherever there is warmth enough for life, ants have found a way to thrive. And in each place, they have adapted, not as individuals struggling alone, but as colonies working together. A single ant, if you watch it closely, might seem almost aimless. It wanders, it pauses, it touches the ground with its antennae, turns, and moves in a new direction. But this apparent randomness is part of a deeper pattern. That ant is not lost. It is searching, sensing, communicating with the world in ways we are only beginning to understand. And when you see not one ant, but hundreds, thousands, millions, the pattern becomes clear. What looked like chaos is actually a kind of soft, distributed intelligence, a way of solving problems that requires no central authority, no single mind in charge. This is the heart of what makes ant colonies so relaxing to contemplate. There is no ant president, no ant manager shouting orders. There is no hierarchy in the way we usually think of it. Instead, there's a kind of gentle consensus, a flow of information and action that moves through the colony like water finding its level. Each ant responds to the signals around it, to the chemical traces left by others, to the needs it encounters, and from those simple responses, complexity emerges. Order arises not from control, but from cooperation. Let us begin with the queen, because that is where many colonies begin. The queen ant is often the largest member of the colony, and she has a singular role: to lay eggs. In some species, a queen may live for decades, quietly producing the next generation, year after year, in the dark safety of the nest. She is not a ruler in any meaningful sense. She does not direct the workers. She does not make decisions about where to forage or how to build. She simply does what her biology has shaped her to do, and the colony flows around her, sustaining her so that she can sustain them. When a queen first begins her life, she is not yet a queen. She is born with wings, as are the male ants, and she waits in the nest until the conditions are right. Then, on a warm day, often after rain, something remarkable happens. Across a wide area, sometimes spanning miles, colonies of the same species release their winged females and males all at once. This is called a nuptial flight, and it is one of the few times in an ant's life when individuals leave the safety of the colony and take to the air. The sky fills with them, thousands upon thousands of ants rising on delicate wings, meeting in the air, mating in flight. It is a brief and fragile moment. The males, having fulfilled their only purpose, will die soon after. But the females, now fertilized, descend back to the earth. They land, and they do something that seems almost symbolic. They tear off their own wings. They will never fly again. They have left one life behind and are about to begin another. Each newly mated queen must now find a place to start her colony. She digs into the soil, or finds a crack in wood, or hollows out a small chamber in whatever substrate her species prefers. And then, alone in the darkness, she begins to lay eggs. She does not eat. She has no workers yet to bring her food. Instead, she metabolizes her own wing muscles, those powerful tissues that carried her into the sky, breaking them down to nourish herself and her first brood. It is a quiet act of transformation, a giving of oneself to create something new. The first eggs hatch in a larvae, soft and helpless. The queen tends them, feeding them with secretions from her own body, keeping them clean, moving them gently if the temperature shifts. When they pupate and finally emerge as adult workers, they are small, often smaller than the workers that will come later, because they were raised on so little. But they are enough. They begin to forage, to bring food back to the nest, and from that moment on, the queen will never need to leave her chamber again. She will be fed, groomed, and protected by her daughters for the rest of her long life. And those daughters, the workers, are the heart of the colony's cooperation. Every worker is female, and every worker is, in a technical sense, sterile. She will not reproduce. She will not start her own colony. Her life is given entirely to the collective, and yet there is no sadness in this, no sense of sacrifice. She is doing exactly what her biology has prepared her for, and in doing so, she ensures that her mother's genes, which are also her genes, continue into the future. This is kin selection, a concept that helps us understand how cooperation can evolve even when individuals do not reproduce themselves. Worker ants do not live as long as queens. Depending on the species, a worker might live for a few months, or a year, or in some cases several years. But in that time, she will perform many roles. Ant colonies have a division of labor that is both flexible and efficient, and it unfolds not through instruction, but through a kind of gentle self-organization. When a worker first emerges from her pupal case, she is soft and pale, and she stays deep in the nest. Her first tasks are the safest, the most interior. She tends a brood, caring for the eggs and larvae and pupae, moving them to the right temperature, cleaning them, feeding them. This is delicate work, essential work, and it is done in near total darkness, by touch and chemical sense. As she ages, her tasks shift. She may begin to work on the nest itself, digging new tunnels, repairing walls, moving soil grain by grain. Ants are architects of the invisible, constructing labyrinths that can extend many feet underground, with chambers for different purposes. Nurseries for the young, storage rooms for food, resting areas for workers, and the queen's chamber at the heart of it all. The structure is not planned in advance. There is no blueprint. Instead, each ant follows simple rules, responding to the shape of the space and the needs of the moment. And the nest grows organically, almost like a living thing itself. Later still, as the worker grows older and her exoskeleton hardens and darkens, she may take on more dangerous tasks. She might become a forager, leaving the nest to search for food, or a defender, standing guard at the entrance, ready to fight if threats appear. The oldest workers, those nearest the end of their lives, are the ones most likely to take the greatest risks. It is a pattern that makes a kind of quiet sense. The colony invests more protection in those who have the most future ahead of them, and those with the least to lose venture farthest into danger. But even this is not rigidly determined. If the colony suddenly loses many foragers, younger workers can shift roles, becoming foragers earlier than they otherwise would. If the brood needs more care, older workers can return to nursing duties. The division of labor is fluid, responsive, shaped by need rather than by rule. It is cooperation as improvisation, a kind of soft jazz played out in the language of pheromones and touch. Pheromones are the invisible words that ants speak. They are chemical signals, molecules released by one ant and detected by another, and they carry meaning. There are pheromones for alarm, sharp and urgent, that spread rapidly through the colony when danger is near. There are pheromones for recruitment, laid down in trails that say, "This way, there is food, follow me." There are pheromones that mark the nest, that identify sisters, that signal the presence of the queen. The air in and around an ant colony is thick with these messages, a constant conversation happening in a language we cannot hear or smell, but which shapes every action the ants take. When a forager finds food, she does not simply carry it back and keep the knowledge to herself. As she returns to the nest, she lays down a trail pheromone, a thin line of scent that marks her path. Other foragers, wandering near the nest entrance, detect this trail and follow it. When they reach the food, they too lay down pheromone as they return, reinforcing the trail. More ants follow. The trail grows stronger. If the food source is large and rich, the trail becomes a highway, with ants streaming back and forth in an efficient line. But if the food runs out, the ants stop reinforcing the trail. The pheromone evaporates, fading away within minutes or hours, and the trail disappears. The colony's attention shifts elsewhere, naturally, without anyone needing to give an order. This is stigmergy, a term that describes how the environment itself can mediate cooperation. The ants are not communicating directly with complex signals. They are simply leaving traces in the world, and those traces guide the actions of others. It is a form of coordination that is elegant and minimal, requiring no memory, no planning, no central control. The world itself becomes the message, and it works beautifully. Ant colonies can solve problems that would challenge even sophisticated algorithms. They can find the shortest path between nest and food, not by calculating or mapping, but by the simple mathematics of pheromone reinforcement. Shorter paths are traveled more quickly, so they are reinforced more often per unit of time, and they become stronger. Longer paths fade. The colony, as a whole, converges on efficiency without any individual ant understanding the concept of efficiency at all. There is something deeply soothing in this. It suggests that complexity does not require complexity. That order does not require a commander. That cooperation can emerge from simple beings following simple rules, and the result can be something far greater than the sum of its parts. Ant colonies are sometimes called superorganisms, a term that captures this idea. Just as a single organism is made of many cells, each performing specialized tasks, a colony is made of many individuals, each contributing to the whole. The colony has a kind of metabolism, taking in food and energy and using it to grow and reproduce. It has a kind of immune system with workers that remove the dead and the diseased, keeping the nest clean and healthy. It has a life cycle, being born when the queen founds it, growing through its early years, reaching maturity, and eventually, in some species, producing new queens and males to start the cycle again. But unlike a single organism, the superorganism is not bound by a single body. It is distributed, flexible, resilient. If part of the nest is destroyed, the colony can rebuild. If workers are lost, new ones emerge to take their place. The colony can adapt to changing conditions, shifting its behavior as the seasons turn, as food becomes scarce or abundant, as threats come and go. It is a form of life that is both fragile and robust, held together not by tissue and bone, but by behavior and chemistry and the quiet, persistent cooperation of thousands of small lives. Let us consider the leafcutter ants because they offer a particularly beautiful example of how cooperation can create something astonishing. Leafcutter ants do not eat the leaves they cut. This surprises many people. You might see them marching in long lines, each carrying a piece of leaf many times her own size, held aloft like a green sail, and assume they are bringing food home. But the leaves are not food. They are farming supplies. Deep in the nest, in special chambers, the ants chew the leaves into a pulp and use it as compost to grow fungus. The fungus is what they eat. It is their only food, cultivated with care in underground gardens that are kept at precise temperatures and humidity levels. The ants weed these gardens, removing any fungal spores that are not the species they cultivate. They fertilize the fungus with their own waste. They prune it, harvest it, and tend it with a dedication that any human gardener would recognize. And the fungus, for its part, has become entirely dependent on the ants. It no longer produces spores that can disperse on the wind. It cannot survive outside the nest. The two species have been evolving together for millions of years, each shaping the other, until they are now inseparable. When a young queen leaves on her nuptial flight, she carries a small pellet of fungus in a pocket in her mouth, a starter culture for the garden she will grow in her new nest. Without it, she and her colony would starve. This is mutualism, cooperation between species, and it is as essential to the ants as the cooperation within the colony. The ants provide the fungus with food and protection. The fungus provides the ants with nutrition. Neither could exist without the other. It is a partnership written in biology, sustained by behavior, and it has allowed leafcutter ants to become some of the most successful herbivores in the tropical forests of Central and South America. The nests of leafcutter ants can be enormous. Some contain millions of individuals and extend many meters underground, with thousands of chambers connected by tunnels. The soil excavated from these nests can form mounds the size of a small house. Inside, the air is carefully regulated. The ants adjust ventilation by opening and closing entrances, by moving soil to create or block airflow. They maintain the temperature and humidity that the fungus needs, even as the weather outside changes. It is climate control achieved through collective behavior, through thousands of small adjustments made by individuals responding to local conditions. And all of this happens without a blueprint, without a plan, without any ant understanding the nest as a whole. Each worker knows only her immediate surroundings, the tasks before her, the signals she receives. But from that local knowledge, global order emerges. The nest functions, the fungus grows, the colony thrives. There are other ants that farm as well. Some species cultivate different fungi. Some tend aphids, protecting them from predators and moving them to fresh feeding sites in exchange for the sweet honeydew the aphids produce. The ants stroke the aphids gently with their antennae, and the aphids release droplets of sugary liquid, which the ants drink. It is a kind of livestock herding, a cooperation between species that benefits both. In the deserts of North America, honeypot ants have developed another remarkable form of cooperation. In these arid environments, food can be abundant after rains, but scarce for long stretches. So the colony creates living storage vessels. Certain workers are fed until their abdomens swell to the size of grapes, translucent and golden with stored nectar. They hang from the ceiling of special chambers. Unable to move, their bodies transformed into living pantries. When food is scarce, other workers approach them and solicit a droplet of the stored liquid, which the repletes regurgitate and share. These swollen workers may live for years in this state, their individual mobility sacrificed for the survival of the colony. It is an extreme form of specialization, and it speaks to the depth of cooperation that ant colonies can achieve. The repletes do not resist their role. They do not resent their immobility. They are simply doing what their biology and their colony need them to do. And in doing so, they ensure that the colony can survive the harsh cycles of the desert. Weaver ants, found in the tropics of Africa, Asia, and Australia, cooperate in a different but equally remarkable way. They build their nests not underground, but in trees by weaving leaves together. But ants do not produce silk as adults. So how do they weave? They use their own larvae. Workers gather at the edges of leaves, gripping one leaf in their mandibles and reaching across the gap to another leaf. More workers join, forming chains, pulling the leaves together. Once the leaves are close enough, other workers arrive carrying mature larvae. These larvae produce silk, and the workers gently squeeze them, stimulating them to release silk threads, which the workers then use to stitch the leaves together. The larvae are living tools, and they are handled with great care, moved from spot to spot, used to bind leaf to leaf until the structure is complete. The result is a nest that is airy, flexible, and secure, woven into the canopy, protected from ground predators and flooding. The colony may build many such nests across several trees, creating a network of connected homes. Workers move between them, sharing food and information, and the colony functions as a single entity spread across the forest. This kind of cooperation, where individuals become tools, where bodies are transformed or sacrificed for the collective, might seem unsettling at first. But there is no coercion here, no suffering. The ants are not aware of alternatives. They are not choosing between self and other. They are simply living out the patterns that evolution has written into them, and those patterns have been shaped by millions of years of success. What works, what allows the colony to survive and reproduce, is what persists. And what persists in ant after ant, colony after colony, is cooperation. Even in conflict, ants cooperate. When a colony is threatened, workers rush to defend it. Some species have soldiers, individuals with larger heads and stronger mandibles, specialized for fighting. But even in species without distinct soldier castes, ordinary workers will fight to protect the nest. They bite, they sting, they spray formic acid. Some ants can recruit others to the fight using alarm pheromones, and the defenders arrive in waves, coordinated not by command, but by chemical signal. There are ants that explode. Truly, certain species in Southeast Asia have workers that can rupture their own bodies when grappling with an enemy, spraying a sticky, toxic substance that immobilizes the threat. It is a form of self-sacrifice that protects the colony, and it happens without hesitation, without fear, because the worker's life is meaningful only in the context of the whole. But not all interactions between colonies are violent. Sometimes, when two colonies of the same species meet, they merge peacefully, especially if they are closely related. The workers mingle, the queens may coexist, and the two colonies become one. In other cases, colonies maintain territories, marking boundaries with pheromones, and workers from different colonies avoid each other, reducing conflict through simple avoidance. There are even ants that enslave other ants, raiding nearby colonies, stealing pupae, and raising them as workers in their own nest. The captured ants, having imprinted on the chemical signature of their captors, work as if they were born into that colony. It is a dark form of cooperation, perhaps, but it is cooperation nonetheless, shaped by the same evolutionary forces that shape mutualism and altruism. The diversity of ant life is staggering. There are ants that live entirely underground, never seeing sunlight, feeding on fungi or the secretions of root-feeding insects. There are ants that glide, spreading their legs and flattening their bodies to steer as they fall from the rainforest canopy back to the trunk of their home tree, avoiding the forest floor where predators wait. There are ants that raft, linking their bodies together to form floating mats that can survive floods, keeping the queen and brood safe above the water until the flood recedes. Each adaptation, each behavior, is a solution to a problem, and each solution is made possible by cooperation. The ants do not invent these solutions consciously. They inherit them, encoded in instinct, refined over generations. But the result is a kind of collective intelligence, a problem-solving ability that emerges from the interactions of many simple individuals. And this is where the relaxing quality of ant colonies truly lies. In a world that often feels chaotic, where cooperation seems fragile and conflict seems inevitable, ants show us a different possibility. They show us that cooperation is not a moral achievement or a political choice. It is a strategy, a way of being, that can be deeply woven into life itself. It is not perfect, it is not utopian, but works. It has worked for 100 million years, and it continues to work quietly beneath our feet in every corner of the world. As you lie here, letting these ideas drift through your mind, you might imagine an ant colony beneath you even now. Workers moving through dark tunnels, tending larvae, carrying food, repairing walls. A queen in her chamber, laying eggs. Foragers above ground, following trails, finding seeds, bringing them home. All of it happening without hurry, without stress. Each ant doing what she does, and the colony, the whole, continuing. There's a rhythm to it, a kind of slow pulse, and it asks nothing of you. It simply is. And in that simple existence, in that quiet cooperation, there's something we can rest in, something that reminds us that life, even in its smallest forms, can be intricate and beautiful and deeply, deeply calm. And gently beyond that quiet beginning, we can drift deeper into the rhythms of the colony, where cooperation unfolds in patterns so soft and steady they seem almost like breathing. There is no rush here, only the slow accumulation of small gestures, repeated across thousands of tiny bodies, until something vast and intricate emerges. Consider the way an ant colony regulates its own temperature. On a warm afternoon, when the sun beats down upon the nest, worker ants do not panic. They do not call meetings or debate solutions. Instead, some of them simply walk to the entrance and begin to fan their wings. The motion is small, almost imperceptible, but together, dozens of ants create a current of air that flows through the tunnels, drawing heat upward and outward. Other workers, sensing the warmth, carry droplets of water into the nest and spread them along the walls. As the water evaporates, it cools the chambers where the brood rests. No single ant understands the concept of evaporative cooling, but the colony, as a whole, knows. And when the night grows cold, the reverse occurs. Workers cluster around the brood chambers, their bodies generating warmth through the simple act of metabolism. They press close, not out of affection, but because their instincts guide them toward the scent of larvae, and the scent grows stronger in the places that need warmth most. The temperature inside a healthy nest can remain remarkably stable, even as the outside world swings between extremes. This is not intelligence in the way we usually think of it. It is something quieter, a kind of distributed wisdom, written into chemistry and motion. Quietly beside this, there's the matter of food distribution. When a forager ant discovers a source of sugar, a drop of nectar, perhaps, or the sweet secretion of an aphid, she does not hoard it. She drinks until her crop, a small expandable stomach, is full, and then she returns to the nest. There, she meets her sisters, and they stroke her with their antennae, asking. She responds by regurgitating a small droplet of the liquid food, which the other ant drinks. This is called trophallaxis, and it is one of the most fundamental acts of cooperation in the colony. Through trophallaxis, food flows from ant to ant, spreading through the nest like a slow, sweet river. A single forager's discovery can nourish dozens of workers, nurses, and even the queen herself. The liquid carries not only calories, but also chemical information, traces of pheromones that tell the colony what kind of food is available, where it was found, and whether more workers should be sent to gather it. In this way, the colony's stomach is not located in any one ant. It is distributed across all of them, a shared organ made of many small bodies. And there is something deeply calming in this, if you let yourself feel it. The idea that no single ant must carry the burden alone, that sustenance, once found, becomes common, that the colony survives not through competition, but through quiet, endless sharing. Further still, we find a phenomenon of task allocation, which unfolds without any central authority. In a colony of 10,000 ants, there is no manager assigning roles. No ant tells another what to do. And yet, the work gets done. Some ants spend their days foraging. Others care for the young. Some dig and maintain tunnels. Some guard the entrance. Some remove the dead. How does this happen? The answer lies in a process called response threshold variation. Each ant is born with a slightly different sensitivity to certain stimuli. One ant might have a low threshold for the scent of hungry larvae. She will begin feeding them even when the need is mild. Another ant has a high threshold for that same scent, so she only responds when the larvae are truly in distress. In this way, the colony always has a few ants ready to respond immediately, and others who serve as a reserve, stepping in only when a need grows urgent. This system is beautifully flexible. If many foragers die, the colony does not collapse. Instead, some of the ants with moderate thresholds for foraging cues begin to leave the nest, drawn outward by the now stronger scent of depleted food stores. The colony rebalances itself, not through planning, but through the simple fact that different ants feel different pulls. And because no ant is locked into a role forever, the system can adapt. A young ant might start her life as a nurse, tending larvae in the dark safety of the inner chambers. As she ages, her thresholds shift. She becomes less sensitive to the needs of the brood and more responsive to the chemical signals that call for builders, foragers, or guards. She moves outward through the nest, taking on new tasks, until finally, in her last days, she works at the most dangerous job of all, foraging in the open air, where predators and weather wait. This is not sacrifice in the way we might imagine it. It is simply the unfolding of her biology, as natural as a flower opening toward the sun. And it ensures that the colony's most valuable members, the young, fertile queen and the brood, are always protected by the oldest, most expendable workers. Quietly, beneath all of this, there runs a deeper current. The colony is not merely a collection of individuals. It is, in a very real sense, a superorganism. The term sounds grand, but the idea is gentle. Just as your body is made of trillions of cells, each with its own function, a colony is made of thousands of ants, each contributing to the whole. Your liver cells do not understand the body. They do not know about your thoughts or dreams, but they perform their function, and you live. The ants are much the same. The colony breathes, though no ant has lungs. It thinks, though no ant has a complex brain. It remembers, though no ant lives long enough to hold the memory alone. The knowledge is stored in the structure of the nest, in the chemical trails that persist on the ground, in the ratios of workers to brood, in the slow accumulation of experience written into the colony's collective behavior. Scientists have found that older colonies, those that have survived for many years, behave differently from young ones. They are more cautious, less likely to take risks, better at conserving resources. This is not because the ants themselves are older. Worker ants live only a few months. It is because the colony as a whole has learned. The patterns that led to survival have been reinforced. The patterns that led to loss have faded away. The colony remembers, even as its members are constantly replaced. And there is something quietly profound in that. The idea that a community can hold wisdom that no individual possesses. That experience can be shared across generations, not through teaching, but through the simple persistence of successful patterns. Let us drift now toward the question of conflict, because even in the gentle world of cooperation, there are moments of tension. Not all ants in a colony are genetically identical. The queen mates with multiple males during her nuptial flight, so her daughters are a mix of half-sisters. In theory, this could lead to competition. Each worker might be expected to favor her full sisters over her half-sisters, to hoard resources or sabotage rivals. But this almost never happens. The workers do not recognize their full sisters. They do not form factions. They simply work, guided by the same chemical cues, serving the same collective goal. The potential for conflict exists, but it is dissolved in the overwhelming tide of cooperation. There are exceptions, of course. In some species, when a queen dies and no replacement is available, workers with functioning ovaries may begin to lay eggs. These eggs, unfertilized, develop into males. Other workers, sensing the chemical signature of these rogue eggs, will sometimes destroy them, eating them or carrying them out of the nest. This is called worker policing, and it serves to maintain the colony's genetic harmony. But even this is not violence in the way we might imagine. It is simply another form of regulation, as automatic as your immune system destroying a damaged cell. In the vast majority of moments, the colony hums along in peace. Cooperation is not a choice the ants make. It is the only option their biology allows. And gently beyond that, we can consider the way colonies interact with one another. When two colonies of the same species meet, the result is often war. The workers fight fiercely, grappling with their mandibles, spraying acid, biting and pulling until one side retreats or is destroyed. These battles can last for days, with thousands of casualties. But even here, there's a strange kind of order. The ants do not hate their enemies. They do not feel anger or fear. They simply recognize a chemical signature that marks the other colony as foreign, and their instincts compel them to attack. It is a recognition system, nothing more, and it serves a purpose. It prevents colonies from merging, which would create chaos, too many queens, too much competition for resources. Some species, however, have found a different path. In a few rare cases, colonies of the same species can coexist peacefully, even forming super colonies that stretch for miles. The largest known super colony is made of Argentine ants, an invasive species that is spread across the globe. In their native South America, Argentine ant colonies fight one another. But in California, Europe, and Japan, the invaders have lost some of their genetic diversity, and with it, their ability to distinguish between colonies. The result is a vast, cooperative network of billions of ants, all working together as if they were one immense family. This super colony is not more intelligent than a single nest. In fact, it may be less efficient in some ways, because coordination becomes more difficult over such distances. But it is extraordinarily successful, overwhelming native ant species wherever it spreads. Cooperation, even when accidental, is a powerful force, and quietly, we can turn our attention to the relationship between ants and other creatures, because cooperation does not end at the colony's edge. Ants have formed partnerships with an astonishing variety of other organisms, each relationship shaped by millions of years of coevolution. We have already spoken of the leafcutter ants and their fungus gardens, but there are other farmers as well. Some ants cultivate aphids, small insects that feed on plant sap and excrete a sugary liquid called honeydew. The ants protect the aphids from predators, gently stroking them with their antennae to encourage the flow of honeydew, which they then drink. In return, the aphids receive safety and sometimes even shelter. Some ant species build small pavilions of soil around their aphid herds, or carry them into the nest at night. This is not quite domestication, not in the way humans have domesticated cattle, but it is close. The ants do not control the aphids' reproduction, but they do influence their survival. And over time, some aphid species have become so dependent on their ant partners that they cannot survive without them. There are also ants that partner with caterpillars. Certain butterfly larvae produce sweet secretions that ants love, and in exchange for this food, the ants guard the caterpillars from parasites and predators. Some caterpillars have even evolved special structures, tiny organs that produce sounds or vibrations that help them communicate with their ant protectors. When danger approaches, the caterpillar calls, and the ants come running. And then there are the plants that have formed alliances with ants. Acacia trees, for example, produce hollow thorns that serve as nesting sites for certain ant species. The trees also secrete nectar from glands on their leaves and produce small, protein-rich nodules that the ants harvest and feed to their larvae. In return, the ants attack any animal that tries to eat the tree's leaves, and they even clear away competing plants from the area around the trunk. The tree grows faster and healthier because of its ant guardians, and the ants thrive in the safety of the thorns. This is called mutualism, a relationship in which both partners benefit. And it is everywhere in the world of ants, woven into the fabric of ecosystems in ways we are only beginning to understand. Further still, there are the parasites and the cheats, because not every relationship is fair. Some species of ants have abandoned foraging altogether and survive by raiding the nests of other ants, stealing their brood, and raising the stolen larvae as workers in their own colony. These are called slave-making ants, though the term is uncomfortable and perhaps misleading. The captured ants do not suffer in the way we might imagine. They simply perform the tasks they were born to do, guided by the chemical signals of their captors, unaware that they are serving a foreign queen. Other species are even more insidious. Certain small ants, called social parasites, infiltrate the nests of larger species and live quietly among them, feeding on the colony's resources without contributing any labor. Some of these parasites have evolved to mimic the chemical signature of their hosts so perfectly that they are never detected. They are invisible thieves, tolerated because they cannot be recognized. And there are beetles, flies, and mites that have learned to live inside ant nests, each with its own strategy for avoiding detection or earning tolerance. Some mimic the ants' pheromones. Some offer sweet secretions. Some simply move so carefully and slowly that the ants never notice them. The nest, which seems like a fortress, is actually porous, filled with hidden guests and secret residents. But even these parasites are part of the system. They shape the evolution of the ants, favoring colonies that are better at detecting intruders, better at maintaining chemical boundaries. And in turn, the parasites evolve better disguises, better strategies. It is an arms race, but a slow one, unfolding over millennia, each side adapting in tiny increments. And gently, we can consider the way ants shape the world around them. A single colony might seem small, but across the planet, ants are one of the most powerful ecological forces. They move more soil than earthworms in many ecosystems, aerating the ground and mixing nutrients. They disperse seeds, carrying them into their nests and discarding them in nutrient-rich refuse piles where they sprout and grow. Some plants have evolved seeds with special attachments, called elaiosomes, that are rich in fats and proteins, treats designed specifically to attract ants. Ants are also predators, consuming vast quantities of insects and other small creatures. In some forests, ants are the primary controllers of herbivorous insects, protecting the trees from being stripped bare. In other ecosystems, they are scavengers, cleaning up dead animals and plant material, recycling nutrients back into the soil. And they are prey as well. Birds, lizards, frogs, and countless other animals depend on ants as a food source. Some species have evolved specialized adaptations for eating ants. Long sticky tongues, thick skin to resist stings, behaviors that allow them to raid nests without being overwhelmed. The ants, in turn, have evolved defenses, stronger stings, thicker armor, coordinated attacks, nests hidden deep underground. This back and forth, this endless dance of adaptation, is part of what makes ecosystems stable. The ants are woven into the web of life so thoroughly that if they were to disappear, the effects would ripple outward in ways we can barely predict. And quietly, we can return to the interior of the nest, where the brood is growing. The eggs, tiny and pale, are tended constantly by the nurses. They are licked clean, moved to chambers with the right temperature and humidity, rotated and repositioned to ensure even development. When the eggs hatch, the larvae emerge, soft, helpless, legless grubs that depend entirely on the workers for survival. The larvae are fed mouth to mouth, receiving regurgitated food from the nurses. They grow quickly, molting several times as their bodies expand. The workers continue to move them, always seeking the optimal conditions. If the nest becomes too dry, the larvae are carried to deeper, moister chambers. If it becomes too wet, they are brought closer to the surface. And then, when the larvae are fully grown, they spin cocoons, or in some species, they simply pupate without a cocoon, their skin hardening into a protective shell. Inside, their bodies are reorganized, transformed from grub to ant. Legs and antennae form. Eyes develop. The nervous system rewires itself. It is a metamorphosis as complete as a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, though it happens in darkness, hidden from the world. When the transformation is complete, the new ant struggles free, pale and soft. The workers help her, pulling away the remnants of the cocoon, grooming her, feeding her. Over the next few days, her exoskeleton hardens and darkens, and she begins to move with the characteristic quickness of an adult ant. She is ready to work, and she does. Without hesitation, without training, she begins to perform the tasks her instincts guide her toward. She is part of the colony now, one more thread in the vast, invisible tapestry. Further still, we can consider the phenomenon of communication in greater depth, because the language of ants is richer than it first appears. Pheromones are the primary medium, but they are not the only one. Ants also communicate through touch, through sound, and even through vibration. When two ants meet, they tap each other with their antennae, a gesture called antenation. This is not a simple greeting. Through this touch, they exchange information, chemical traces that tell each ant about the other's recent activities, her health, her colony membership. It is a conversation in chemistry, faster and more detailed than words. Some ants also produce sounds, usually by rubbing one part of their body against another, a process called stridulation. The sounds are often too quiet for human ears, but other ants can detect them, especially through vibrations in the ground or the walls of the nest. These sounds can serve as alarms, wanting other workers to come and help, or as signals during cooperative tasks, coordinating the movement of a large object. And there is evidence that ants can even communicate through the substrate itself. When a worker taps her head against the ground, The vibration travels through the soil, and other ants can sense it. This allows for communication over distances, through barriers, in ways that pheromones alone cannot achieve. The complexity of this communication is still being explored. Each new study reveals another layer, another subtle channel through which information flows. The ants, it seems, are always talking, always listening, always adjusting their behavior based on the signals they receive. And gently, we can think about the role of memory in the colony. Individual ants have simple brains with only about 250,000 neurons, compared to the 86 billion in a human brain. And yet, they are capable of learning. A forager can remember the location of a food source and return to it day after day. She can learn to navigate complex mazes, to associate certain scents with rewards, to adjust her behavior based on experience. But her memory is short-lived. When she dies, her knowledge dies with her. The colony, however, remembers. The trail she helped to establish persists. The food sources she discovered continue to be exploited. The patterns of foraging she contributed to remain, reinforced by the workers who followed her path. This is a kind of collective memory, stored not in any brain, but in the environment and the behaviors of the group. It is fragile in some ways. A sudden change in conditions can erase it. But it is also robust, because it does not depend on any single individual. And there is something quietly beautiful in this. The idea that knowledge can exist in the spaces between minds, in the trails and traces we leave behind, in the patterns we create together. Quietly, we can turn our attention to the phenomenon of nest architecture, because the structures ants build are marvels of engineering, even though no ant understands engineering. The nests are shaped by simple rules, repeated by many workers, until complexity emerges. A worker digging a tunnel does not have a blueprint. She digs where the soil is soft, where the scent of carbon dioxide is high, indicating that the nest needs more ventilation. She deposits the soil outside, or uses it to build walls and chambers. Other workers, following the same rules, dig nearby. Gradually, a network of tunnels forms, branching and connecting, creating a structure that is efficient and resilient. Some species build shallow nests, just beneath the surface, with many entrances to allow for quick evacuation if the nest is flooded. Others dig deep, creating vertical shafts that reach down several meters, accessing cooler, more stable temperatures. Some build mounds above ground, using the sun's heat to warm the upper chambers, creating a gradient of temperatures that the workers can use to regulate the brood. And some species build nests that are almost unbelievably complex. The leafcutter ants, for example, create underground cities with hundreds of chambers, interconnected by tunnels, ventilated by a system of shafts that draw fresh air down and stale air up. The fungus gardens are kept in the largest chambers, carefully maintained at the optimal temperature and humidity. Waste is stored in special chambers far from the gardens to prevent contamination. The queen resides in a central chamber, surrounded by nurses and guards. These nests can house millions of ants and persist for decades, growing and changing as the colony's needs evolve. And yet, no ant oversees the construction. No one holds a plan. The nest builds itself through the collective action of thousands of workers, each following her own simple instincts. And there is a deep calm in contemplating this. The idea that order does not require a commander. That beauty can emerge from repetition and patience. That the most intricate structures can be built one small action at a time. The narrative continues to unfold gently, carrying us deeper into the quiet rhythms of ant life, where cooperation reveals itself in ever more subtle and beautiful patterns. Consider for a moment the way an ant colony responds to injury. When workers are lost to predators or accidents, the colony does not mourn in any way we would recognize. Instead, it adjusts. The remaining workers, through mechanisms still not entirely understood, shift their behavior. Younger ants may begin foraging earlier than they otherwise would. Older ants may return to brood care if needed. The colony flows around the absence like water around a stone, redistributing effort without central command, without meeting or vote. This is cooperation as fluid architecture, constantly rebuilding itself according to need. And within this flow, there exists a phenomenon called behavioral flexibility. Individual ants are not rigidly programmed. A forager can become a nurse. A guard can become a builder. The roles we observe are temporary states, not permanent identities. What determines which role an ant assumes at any given time is a combination of age, experience, and the colony's current needs, communicated through that ever-present language of chemicals and contact. An ant encountering many nurses might be less likely to become one herself. An ant encountering few foragers might be nudged, chemically, toward that role. The system balances itself through countless small interactions, none of which alone determines the outcome, all of which together create stability. There is something deeply calming in this. The colony does not rely on any single ant to be perfect, to make the right decision every time. It relies instead on the law of large numbers, on the statistical likelihood that enough ants, responding to local information, will together produce the right collective response. Mistakes are absorbed. Individual confusion is buffered by collective coherence. The system is robust, not because its parts are infallible, but because its structure allows for error. Quietly, in the darkness of the nest, another form of cooperation unfolds in the care of the queen. She is not a ruler in any meaningful sense, but she is essential. Without her, the colony cannot replace its workers, and so she is tended constantly. Workers groom her, removing debris and parasites. They feed her, mouth to mouth, offering her the richest foods the colony can provide. They carry away her eggs as soon as she lays them, transporting them to climate-controlled chambers where they will be safe. The queen, in return, does nothing but produce eggs, sometimes thousands per day, a living engine of reproduction, utterly dependent on the workers who are, in turn, her daughters. This relationship is not servitude. It is mutualism at the genetic level. The workers, being female but largely sterile, cannot reproduce themselves. Their evolutionary success is measured not in their own offspring, but in their sisters, the new queens and workers their mother produces. By caring for the queen, they're caring for their own genetic future. By raising her eggs, they're raising siblings who share more of their genes than their own offspring would. This is kin selection, the mathematics of relatedness, playing out in the devotional care of a single individual who is, paradoxically, both irreplaceable and entirely dependent. And beyond the queen, there is the care of the brood itself. Ant larvae are helpless, soft-bodied, and immobile. They cannot feed themselves, cannot regulate their temperature, cannot move to safety. They are entirely reliant on the workers, who tend them with extraordinary attentiveness. Workers move larvae constantly, carrying them in their mandibles to chambers with optimal temperature and humidity. They feed them regurgitated food, adjusting the diet according to the larva's stage of development. They lick them clean, preventing fungal infections. They respond to chemical signals from the larvae, signals that communicate hunger or developmental stage. The larvae, in a sense, are speaking, and the workers are listening. Some species take this even further. In certain ant colonies, the larvae produce secretions that the workers consume. These secretions are nutritious, and the workers actively solicit them, stroking the larvae to encourage secretion. This creates a mutualistic loop. The workers feed the larvae, and the larvae, in turn, feed the workers. The relationship is reciprocal, a flow of resources in both directions, blurring the line between caregiver and dependent. The colony becomes a network of exchanges, each member both giving and receiving, each part sustained by the whole. There is a species called cataglyphus, the desert ant, whose workers forage in conditions that would kill most insects. They venture out onto the scorching sand of the Sahara when surface temperatures exceed 50 degrees Celsius, a heat that would be lethal if they remained exposed for more than minutes. And yet they do this, day after day, because the heat creates an opportunity. Most predators cannot tolerate such extremes. The desert, at midday, belongs to cataglyphus. They race across the sand on long legs that lift their bodies away from the burning surface, moving at speeds remarkable for their size, searching for insects that have succumbed to the heat. What is extraordinary about cataglyphus is not just their heat tolerance, but their navigation. They travel hundreds of meters from the nest, across a landscape almost devoid of landmarks, and then return directly home, without retracing their outbound path. They do this through a process called path integration. As they walk, they keep a continuous internal tally of their direction and distance from the nest, using the sun's position and polarized light patterns in the sky as a compass, and counting their steps as a measure of distance. When they are ready to return, they compute the direct route home and walk it, a straight line across the featureless sand. This is navigation as mathematics, performed by a brain smaller than a grain of salt. And quietly, this ability serves the colony. Each forager's successful return brings food, but it also brings information. Other ants can follow successful foragers on subsequent trips, learning productive areas. The colony's collective knowledge of the territory expands with each journey, each safe return, each successful discovery. The foragers are not just feeding the colony, they are mapping the world. Further still, consider the phenomenon of age polytheism, the tendency for ants to change tasks as they age. In many species, the youngest workers remain inside the nest, caring for the brood. As they age, they transition to nest maintenance, then to nest defense, and finally to foraging. This progression is not arbitrary. The youngest workers, being the most valuable to the colony's future, are kept in the safest location. The oldest workers, who have already contributed much of their potential lifetime labor, are sent into the dangerous world outside, where predation risk is highest. The colony, without conscious thought, allocates risk according to remaining reproductive value. It is actuarial science, encoded in biology. But this progression is not rigid. If the colony suddenly loses many foragers, younger workers can accelerate their transition, becoming foragers earlier than usual. If the brood expands rapidly, older workers can revert to nursing. The system is responsive, adjusting the distribution of labor to match current needs. This is resilience through flexibility, the ability to reorganize in the face of changing circumstances. And in some species, there exists a caste of workers who do very little. They are called reserve workers or inactive workers, and they spend much of their time simply resting inside the nest. For years, scientists were puzzled by this apparent laziness. Why would a colony tolerate individuals who contribute so little? The answer, it turns out, is that these workers are a reserve, a buffer against sudden demand. When the colony faces a crisis, an attack, a sudden influx of food, a breach in the nest, these inactive workers mobilize, providing a surge of labor exactly when it is needed. They are not lazy, they are waiting. Their inactivity is a form of insurance, a strategic reserve maintained by the colony against unpredictable futures. This is cooperation across time, not just space. The colony is not optimized for the present moment alone, but for the range of possible futures it might face. It maintains redundancy, spare capacity, buffers against uncertainty. It is a system designed not for efficiency, but for robustness. Quietly, in the soil, another form of cooperation is unfolding. Many ant species are seed dispersers, playing a crucial role in plant reproduction. Certain plants produce seeds with a specialized structure called an oleosome, a small, nutrient-rich appendage attached to the seed. Ants are attracted to these oleosomes. They carry the seeds back to their nests, consume the oleosome, and discard the seed, often in a refuse chamber rich in nutrients. The seed, now underground, protected from seed predators and fire, positioned in fertile soil, germinates. The plant benefits from dispersal and protection. The ant benefits from food. Neither species could achieve this alone. The cooperation spans kingdoms, linking the slow life of plants to the quick life of insects. Some plants have evolved to depend entirely on ants for dispersal. Without ants, their seeds would not travel, would not find suitable germination sites, would not survive. The ants, in turn, have come to rely on these seeds as a seasonal food source. The relationship has become obligate, each partner's survival intertwined with the others. This is mutualism deepened over evolutionary time into mutual dependence. Cooperation so thorough it becomes invisible, assumed, essential. And there are ant species that farm bacteria. Certain cephalotes, ants maintain bacterial cultures in specialized pouches in their digestive systems. These bacteria help the ants digest plant material that would otherwise be inaccessible, breaking down cellulose and other complex compounds. The ants, in return, provide the bacteria with a stable environment and a constant supply of food. The bacteria are passed from generation to generation, from worker to larva through trophallaxis, a vertical transmission that ensures every ant in the colony carries the necessary symbionts. The colony is not just ants, but ants and bacteria together, a composite organism, a cooperation that extends into the microbial realm. This theme repeats across the ant world. Many species harbor symbiotic microbes that provide nutrients, protect against pathogens, or detoxify harmful compounds. The ants have become ecosystems unto themselves, hosting communities of microscopic partners whose contributions are essential but invisible. Cooperation at this scale is biochemical, a negotiation conducted in proteins and metabolites, in the quiet interior spaces of cells and guts. Consider, too, the way ant colonies manage waste. Waste, in a densely populated nest, is a serious problem. It can harbor pathogens, attract parasites, and contaminate food stores. And so ants have evolved elaborate waste management systems. Many species maintain dedicated refuse chambers, often located far from the brood and food storage areas. Workers transport waste to these chambers, depositing it and then returning to clean areas of the nest. Some species even have specialized waste workers, individuals who handle refuse and, as a result, spend most of their time in the contaminated zones, reducing the risk of disease transmission to the rest of the colony. In some species, waste workers are socially isolated. Other ants avoid them, do not engage in trophallaxis with them, do not groom them. This is not cruelty, it is epidemiology. By isolating individuals who are most likely to carry pathogens, the colony reduces the spread of disease. The waste workers, in accepting this role, protect their sisters. They are the colony's immune system, a living barrier between contamination and health. And in a remarkable parallel to human sanitation, some ant species remove their dead. When an ant dies, it begins to decompose, releasing chemicals that signal danger to the living. Workers detect these chemicals and respond by carrying the corpse out of the nest, often to the same refuse areas where other waste is deposited. This is undertaking behavior, a funeral without ceremony, driven by the pragmatic need to prevent disease. The dead are honored not with ritual, but with swift removal, a form of respect that prioritizes the living. But the system is not perfect. Sometimes, through experimental mischief, scientists have applied the chemical signature of death to a living ant. The result is both tragic and comical. The living ant is carried, struggling, to the refuse pile by her sisters. She is not dead, but she smells dead, and the workers respond to the chemical signal, not the reality. She will eventually clean herself, removing the death scent, and return to the nest. But for a time, she is treated as a corpse. The system, so effective in general, can be fooled, a reminder that even the most sophisticated cooperation is based on simple rules that can, occasionally, misfire. Gently, let us turn to the phenomenon of colony fission, the way some ant colonies reproduce not through the departure of a single queen, but through the splitting of the entire colony. In these species, when a colony grows too large, a portion of the workers and one or more queens depart together, forming a new colony nearby. This is reproduction at the level of the superorganism, the colony giving birth to a daughter colony. The process requires extraordinary coordination. Workers must decide when to leave, which queen to follow, where to establish the new nest. And yet there is no central planner, no meeting, no vote. The decision emerges from the interactions of thousands of individuals, each responding to local cues, each contributing to a collective choice that none of them alone could make. In some species, the process begins with scouts. Workers explore the surrounding area, searching for suitable nest sites. When a scout finds a promising location, she returns and recruits others through a combination of pheromones and physical leading, guiding nestmates to the site. If the site is truly suitable, more and more workers visit it, and a positive feedback loop develops. The more workers that visit, the stronger the chemical trail, the more attractive the site becomes. Eventually, a threshold is reached, and the colony commits, with a portion of the workers and a queen moving en masse to the new location. The decision is democratic in a sense, determined by the collective assessment of many individuals, weighted by the quality of the options. This is swarm intelligence, the ability of groups to solve problems that individuals cannot. The colony, as a whole, is smarter than any ant within it. It can make complex decisions, optimize routes, allocate resources, respond to threats. And it does this without consciousness, without language, without anything we would recognize as thought. It is intelligence of a different kind, distributed and emergent, a pattern that arises from simplicity. And in the quiet spaces between these grand patterns, there are small acts of cooperation that are easy to overlook. An ant struggling to carry a large food item is joined by a nestmate, and together they transport it. An ant trapped in a crevice is freed by a passing worker who pauses to help. An ant weakened by age or injury is fed by younger workers, sustained beyond her productive years by the surplus of the colony. These are not instinctive responses to chemical signals, or at least not only that. They suggest a kind of flexibility, a responsiveness to the immediate situation, a cooperation that is improvisational and context-dependent. There is a species, Temnothorax albipennis, whose colonies make collective decisions about nest sites with remarkable sophistication. When their current nest is destroyed, the colony must choose a new home quickly. Scouts explore the area and assess potential sites based on multiple criteria: size, entrance configuration, light levels, proximity to the old nest. Each scout, upon finding a site, evaluates it and then returns to recruit others, with the intensity of recruitment proportional to the site's quality. Better sites receive more vigorous recruitment. As more ants visit a site, the recruitment intensifies, creating a positive feedback loop. But the system also includes a negative feedback, a quorum threshold. Once enough ants have gathered at a site, recruitment stops and the colony commits. The result is that the colony reliably chooses the best available option, even though no single ant has compared all the options. The decision is made collectively, through a process that balances exploration and exploitation, speed and accuracy. This is the same algorithmic structure used by honeybees to choose nest sites, and by human groups in certain decision-making contexts. It is a solution to the problem of collective choice that has been discovered independently by multiple lineages, a convergence on an effective strategy. The ants are not imitating bees or humans. They're solving the same problem with the same mathematical logic. And there is something soothing in this convergence, this evidence that certain patterns of cooperation are not arbitrary cultural inventions, but deep structural solutions to universal problems. The ants are showing us something fundamental about how groups can think, how many simple agents can together produce wise choices. Quietly, in tropical forests, there are ants that build living bridges. Army ants, when they encounter a gap in their path, will link their bodies together, forming a chain or a platform that other ants can cross. This is self-assembly, the creation of structure from the bodies of the builders themselves. The ants that form the bridge are not permanently stuck. They can detach and rejoin the march. But while they are part of the bridge, their infrastructure, their bodies serving the collective movement, the bridge shortens the path, speeds the flow of traffic, and the colony benefits. The individual ants sacrifice mobility for a time, but they are part of a system that moves faster and more efficiently because of their contribution. The bridges are not static. They adjust in real time to traffic flow. If many ants are crossing, the bridge may widen, more ants adding their bodies to accommodate the flow. If traffic decreases, ants may leave the bridge, reducing the cost. The structure is dynamic, responsive, optimized continuously by the simple rule that ants join the bridge if it shortens their path and leave if they are not needed. There is no blueprint, no engineer. The bridge designs itself. And in some cases, these bridges are not just spans across gaps, but living ropes used to descend from trees or scale obstacles. The ants link together in chains, hanging from a branch or a leaf, extending downward until they reach the ground or another surface. Other ants then climb down the living rope, using their sisters' bodies as a ladder. It is cooperation as material, the body as tool, the individual as component in a larger machine. There is a humility in this, a willingness to be used, to serve a function beyond one's own immediate interest. And yet it is not sacrifice in the way we might understand it. The ants are not choosing altruism over selfishness. They are following simple rules that, in the context of their colony, lead to outcomes that benefit their genes. The appearance of selflessness is the result of kinship and the mathematics of inclusive fitness. But the result, regardless of the mechanism, is cooperation of breathtaking elegance. Gently, consider the way ants respond to flooding. Many species live in areas prone to seasonal floods, and they have evolved strategies to survive. Some species, when floodwaters rise, link their bodies together into a living raft. The ants on the bottom of the raft are submerged, but they trap air in their hydrophobic cuticles and among their bodies, creating pockets of buoyancy. The raft floats, carrying the queen, the brood, and the rest of the workers to safety. The ants on the bottom rotate periodically, ensuring that no individual is submerged for too long. The raft can float for days, even weeks, until the waters recede or the colony reaches dry land. This is cooperation under crisis, the colony transforming itself into a life-saving structure. The ants do not panic, do not scatter. They organize, link, float. The system is robust because it is collective, because no single ant's survival determines the outcome, because the structure is redundant and self-repairing. And when the raft finally reaches land, the ants disassemble, resuming their individual roles. The crisis passed, the cooperation dissolved back into the ordinary rhythms of colony life. The raft was not a permanent structure, but a temporary adaptation, called into being by necessity and released when no longer needed. This is flexibility at the level of the superorganism, the ability to shift form and function in response to the environment. There are ant species that cultivate algae. Certain cephalotes ants maintain algae gardens on the walls of their nests, and the algae may provide nutrients or help regulate humidity. The relationship is not well understood, but it suggests another layer of cooperation, another partnership between ants and other organisms. The ants are not just farmers of fungi or herders of aphids. They are gardeners of algae, managers of microscopic ecosystems within their own homes. And there are ants that drink honeydew not from aphids, but from plants directly. Some plants produce extrafloral nectaries, glands that secrete sugary liquid on stems or leaves away from the flowers. These nectaries attract ants, who drink the nectar and, in return, defend the plant from herbivores. The ants patrol the plant, attacking caterpillars, beetles, and other insects that might feed on the leaves. The plant benefits from protection. The ants benefit from food. It is a mutualism mediated by sugar, a contract written in chemistry. Some of these relationships are so tightly evolved that the plant and the ants cannot survive without each other. The plant produces structures specifically for the ants, hollow thorns or specialized chambers where the ants can nest. The ants, in turn, devote themselves to the plant's defense, attacking anything that touches it, clearing away competing vegetation, even pruning the plant to optimize its growth. The partnership becomes obligate, each species' evolution shaped by the other, cooperation deepened into codependency. And quietly, in the background of all this, there is the slow work of evolution, the process by which cooperation itself evolves. Cooperation is not inevitable. It must be favored by natural selection, and that requires specific conditions. There must be repeated interactions, so that cooperation can be reciprocated. There must be relatedness, so that helping others helps one's own genes. There must be mechanisms to prevent cheating, to ensure that cooperators are not exploited by freeloaders. Ant colonies meet all these conditions. Workers are related, sharing genes through their mother. They interact constantly over the course of their entire lives. And cheating is difficult because workers are largely sterile and because the colony can police defectors, destroying eggs laid by workers who attempt to reproduce. The conditions for cooperation are so favorable that it has evolved to extraordinary degrees, creating societies of stunning complexity and efficiency. But cooperation is not perfect. There are conflicts within colonies, tensions between the queen's reproductive interests and the workers' interests, between workers and workers, between colonies of the same species. These conflicts are usually subtle, expressed in small biases in behavior, in which eggs are cared for and which are neglected, in which larvae are fed and which are culled. The colony is not a utopia of perfect harmony, but a negotiated balance of competing interests, held together by kinship and mutual dependence. And yet, from the outside, it appears seamless. The conflicts are invisible, subsumed into the smooth functioning of the whole. The colony works, and that is what we see, the cooperation so thorough that the underlying tensions are hidden. There is a species, Harpagnathos saltator, where workers can become reproductives. In this species, when the queen dies, the workers engage in ritual battles, striking each other with their antennae in contests that can last for weeks. Eventually, a small number of workers, usually 5 or fewer, emerge as victors. These workers, called gamergates, begin to reproduce, laying eggs that develop into new workers and, eventually, new queens. The other workers accept this, caring for the gamergate's offspring, maintaining the colony. The transition is orderly, the conflict ritualized, the cooperation reestablished under new leadership. This is succession without violence, conflict without destruction. The battles are real, but they are constrained by rules, by ritualized behaviors that prevent lethal harm. The colony finds a new equilibrium, and life continues. And in this, there is a lesson, quiet and unspoken. Cooperation does not require the absence of conflict. It requires mechanisms to manage conflict, to channel it into forms that do not destroy the group. The ants have found such mechanisms, evolved over millions of years, encoded in instinct and chemistry. They show us that cooperation and conflict can coexist, that a system can be both competitive and collaborative, that harmony is not the absence of tension, but the management of it. Quietly, as you rest, consider the time scales on which these systems operate. A worker ant lives for weeks or months. A queen can live for years, even decades. A colony can persist for longer still, replacing workers and queens, maintaining continuity across generations. The cooperation we observe is not just between individuals alive at the same moment, but between generations, between the ants of today and the ants of tomorrow, linked by the continuity of the colony. The workers today are raising the queens and workers of the future. They are building nests that will outlast them, establishing trails and territories that future generations will use. They are cooperating not just with their sisters, but with ants not yet born, ants they will never meet. This is cooperation across time, a legacy of structure and knowledge passed down through the continuity of the colony. And the colony, in turn, is shaped by the past. The trails it uses were established by earlier generations. The nest it inhabits was dug by ants long dead. The fungus garden, in species that farm fungi, is a lineage as old as the colony itself, passed from queen to daughter queen, a living inheritance. The colony is not just a collection of individuals, but a continuity, a tradition, a slow accumulation of structure and knowledge. This is history without memory, tradition without culture. The ants do not remember the past, but they inherit its consequences. The cooperation of previous generations shapes the world in which current cooperation unfolds. And in this, there's a deep calm. The colony is larger than any individual, larger than any generation. It persists, adapts, continues. The individual ants come and go, but the colony endures, a pattern that reproduces itself, a cooperation that sustains itself, a system that is, in its own way, immortal. And so we drift further still into the quieter dimensions of cooperation, where the boundaries between individual and collective blur like fog meeting water, and where the simplest gestures accumulate into something far greater than their sum. There exists within many ant colonies a phenomenon so subtle it was overlooked for decades, a form of cooperation that requires no movement at all. Some workers, particularly older ones or those with certain genetic profiles, serve as living storage vessels. They hang motionless in dark chambers, their abdomens swollen to translucent globes filled with liquid food, nectar, or honeydew. These are the repletes, the living pantries of species like honeypot ants. They cannot walk, they cannot forage. They simply hold, for months or even years, the surplus of better times. When scarcity arrives, their sisters approach and gently stroke their antennae, and the repletes regurgitate small measured portions, sustaining the colony through drought or winter. This is cooperation stripped to its essence, one body becoming a resource, willingly, chemically, without protest or awareness of sacrifice. The repletes do not suffer. They do not yearn for movement. They are simply part of a system that flows through them, and in their stillness, the colony endures. And there is something deeply calming in recognizing that cooperation does not always mean action. Sometimes it means holding. Sometimes it means waiting. Sometimes the most vital role is to be still and full while others move around you. Gently beyond that stillness, there are ants who cooperate across the boundary of life itself. When a worker dies inside the nest, her body becomes a problem, not because of sentiment, but because of chemistry. Decomposition releases compounds that can harbor pathogens, fungi, bacteria that threaten the living. And so, within hours, sometimes minutes, specialized workers detect the chemical signature of death, a blend of oleic acid and other breakdown molecules. They approach the corpse, grasp it gently, and carry it away to a designated midden, a graveyard located far from the nest's heart. This is undertaking, and it happens without ceremony, without pause. The dead are honored only by removal, by the swift and gentle restoration of hygiene. Some species go further. They coat the dead in antimicrobial secretions before transport, reducing the risk of contamination. Others dismantle the body, scattering parts to accelerate decomposition and minimize fungal spread. There is no mourning, but there is care. There is no grief, but there is respect encoded in behavior, in the cooperation between the living and the chemical memory of the dead. And if you were to place a living ant in oleic acid, her sisters would carry her to the midden, even as she struggles, because the signal overrides perception. Cooperation, in this case, follows chemistry more than reality, and that too is part of the system's elegance. Further still, there are colonies that cooperate not just with the living or the dead, but with the unborn. In species where queens are long-lived, sometimes decades old, the workers invest immense energy in her care, grooming her, feeding her, even carrying her to safer chambers when threats arise. But the queen is not merely a reproductive vessel. She is a chemical anchor. Her pheromones suppress the ovaries of workers, yes, but they also stabilize behavior, reduce aggression, and synchronize the colony's rhythm. When she ages, her pheromone output weakens, and the colony begins to shift. Workers start to develop their own ovaries. Aggression rises. The social fabric loosens. In some species, the workers collectively decide to raise new queens before the old one dies, preparing for transition. In others, the colony fragments, or workers begin laying unfertilized eggs that become males. This is succession, not through law or hierarchy, but through the fading of a chemical voice. The queens decline as the colony's signal to transform, and the workers respond not with panic, but with a slow, cooperative restructuring. They are midwives to their own future, guided by the quieting presence of the one who once held them together. And there is something quietly profound in this, that the end of one life becomes the beginning of many decisions, and that cooperation extends even into the space left by absence. Quietly beside that transition, there are ants who cooperate by forgetting. In colonies with multiple queens, or in super colonies that stretch for thousands of kilometers, individual identity becomes less important than collective identity. Workers from one nest will accept workers from another, even if they have never met, because they share a colony odor, a chemical passport. But this odor is not fixed. It is a blend of hydrocarbons produced by all members, shared through contact, grooming, and trophallaxis. It is a living average, constantly updated. When a worker moves between nests, she brings her odor with her, and it blends into the local signature, and over time, the boundaries dissolve. This is cooperation through assimilation, through the gentle erosion of difference. In Argentine ant super colonies, millions of nests function as one because no individual remembers where she came from. There is no nationalism, no tribalism, only a shared chemical language that spans continents. The cost of this is high. Such super colonies can become ecologically dominant, outcompeting native species. But within the colony, there is peace, a vast humming cooperation built on the willingness to forget the self and join the whole. And perhaps there is something restful in imagining a world where identity is not a fortress, but a fluid thing, constantly remade by touch and proximity. Further into the quieter patterns, there are ants who cooperate by teaching. though they do not know they teach. In certain species, experienced foragers lead naive workers to food sources through a process called tandem running. The leader moves slowly, pausing frequently, while the follower keeps contact with her antennae, learning the route through touch and scent. If the follower loses contact, the leader stops and waits. If the follower wanders, the leader adjusts her path. This is teaching, measured and patient, though neither ant possesses a concept of education. The leader sacrifices speed for the sake of the follower's learning, and the follower's attention is rewarded with knowledge. Over time, the follower becomes a leader, and the route is preserved not in any individual, but in the social transmission of experience. This is culture in its simplest form, the cooperative inheritance of behavior across generations, without language, without writing, only the gentle repetition of guided movement. And there is something soothing in knowing that teaching does not require intention, only patience and the willingness to slow down for another. Gently beyond that teaching, there are ants who cooperate by playing dead when attacked by predators or rival colonies. Some workers freeze completely, legs tucked, antennae still, releasing no alarm pheromones, offering no movement to trigger further aggression. This is thanatosis, death feigning, and it is a cooperative defense. If one ant fights, she may draw attention to others. If one ant runs, she may lead predators to the nest. But if she becomes a lifeless shell, the threat may lose interest and move on. Her stillness protects the colony. Other workers, detecting no alarm signals, remain calm, and the danger passes like a shadow. Minutes later, the dead ant rises and resumes her tasks. She has sacrificed nothing but moments, and in those moments, the colony's safety was preserved. This is cooperation through invisibility, through the willingness to become nothing so that the whole can remain everything. And perhaps you can feel the quietness in that. The way stillness itself can be a form of contribution, the way doing nothing can sometimes be the most important thing. Further still, there are ants who cooperate across the boundary of species in ways that reshape entire ecosystems. Acacia ants, as mentioned before, defend their host trees with remarkable aggression, but the cooperation goes deeper. The trees provide not only nectar and shelter, but also beltian bodies, small protein-rich nodules that grow on leaf tips specifically to feed the ants. The ants, in turn, prune away competing vegetation, attack herbivorous insects, and even remove fungal spores from the tree's bark. The tree grows faster, lives longer, and produces more seeds in the presence of ants. The ants thrive in the safety of the tree. Neither could flourish as well alone. This is mutualism so tightly woven that the tree's evolution has been shaped by the ant's presence, and the ant's behavior has been shaped by the tree's offerings. It is cooperation across kingdoms, across millions of years, a partnership written into the very structure of leaves and instincts. And there is something quietly marvelous in that. The way life finds ways to intertwine, to build systems where giving and receiving become indistinguishable. Quietly beside that partnership, there are ants who cooperate by enslaving others, though the word enslave carries human weight that does not quite fit. Slave-making ants, such as Polyergus, raid the nests of other species, stealing pupae and larvae. When these stolen young emerge, they imprint on the chemical signature of their captors and work as if they were born into that colony. They forage, they feed, they clean, while the Polyergus workers, specialized for raiding, do little else. The slaves are not coerced. They are chemically deceived, their cooperation hijacked by a false identity. It is parasitism, yes, but it is also cooperation, twisted into a form that benefits only one party. The enslaved workers cooperate perfectly, not knowing they serve a foreign queen. And the Polyergus, in turn, cooperate among themselves to organize raids, to carry pupae without damaging them, to integrate the stolen workers smoothly. It is a dark mirror of mutualism, cooperation as exploitation, and yet the mechanisms are the same. Chemical signals, task allocation, collective action. And perhaps there is something unsettling but honest in acknowledging that cooperation is a tool, neutral in itself, capable of building gardens or empires, depending on who wields it. Further into the architecture of cooperation, there are ants who build not with earth or leaves, but with their own bodies in motion. Army ants, as they march through rainforests, create living highways, lanes of workers moving in opposite directions, some carrying food back to the bivouac, others heading out to hunt. The lanes are maintained not by markers, but by the flow itself, by workers adjusting their speed and position in response to traffic. When the path narrows, workers slow down. When it widens, they speed up. There are no traffic lights, no rules, only local interactions that produce global efficiency. The result is a transportation network that rivals human road systems in throughput, all built from the cooperative movement of individuals who cannot see the whole. It is emergent order, the same principle that guides murmurations of starlings or the flow of water in a river, applied to the problem of moving resources across a forest floor. And there is something deeply restful in watching such systems, in seeing order arise not from control, but from simple, repeated interactions, each small and unremarkable, together creating something beautiful. Gently beyond those highways, there are ants who cooperate by building gardens underground, not of fungus this time, but of roots. Leafcutter ants, in addition to their fungal agriculture, inadvertently cultivate the roots of certain plants. As they excavate their massive nests, they create chambers and tunnels that aerate the soil, and their waste deposits enrich it with nutrients. Plant roots grow into these spaces, thriving in the improved conditions. The ants do not eat the roots, and the roots do not feed the ants, but both benefit. The plants gain access to deeper, richer soil. The ants gain structural stability as roots reinforce tunnel walls. This is cooperation without contact, without awareness, a partnership formed by the overlapping consequences of two life strategies. The ants are gardeners who do not know they garden, and the plants are architects who do not know they build. And perhaps there is something quietly poetic in that, the way cooperation can happen in the spaces between intentions, in the accidental overlaps of different lives. Further still, there are ants who cooperate by creating microclimates within their nests, not just through ventilation, but through the strategic placement of water. Desert ants in some species carry water droplets into the nest during the wet season and deposit them in specific chambers. As the water evaporates slowly, it cools the surrounding area and raises humidity, creating pockets of livable space in an otherwise hostile environment. Workers move brood into these chambers during the hottest parts of the day, then move them out as temperatures drop. The water carriers do not understand thermodynamics. The brood tenders do not understand evaporative cooling. But together, through simple behavioral rules, they engineer a climate-controlled nursery in the heart of the desert. This is cooperation as environmental engineering, as the collective manipulation of physical laws to create conditions that no individual could survive alone. And there is something soothing in recognizing that even in the harshest places, cooperation can carve out pockets of gentleness, small havens where life can rest and grow. Quietly beside that engineering, there are ants who cooperate by synchronizing their sleep. Yes, ants sleep, though not as we do. They enter brief periods of immobility, antennae drooping, legs relaxed, unresponsive to minor disturbances. These rest periods last only a few minutes at a time, but they are essential. And in many species, workers synchronize their rest so that the colony is never entirely asleep. Some workers rest while others remain alert, and the shifts rotate smoothly, ensuring constant vigilance and constant labor. Queens, interestingly, sleep more deeply and more frequently than workers, sometimes for up to 9 hours a day in short bursts. This makes sense. The queen's role is long-term survival and reproduction, not immediate response. Workers, by contrast, sleep lightly and briefly, always ready to wake if alarm pheromones spread. This is cooperation across the boundary of consciousness, a collective rhythm of waking and resting that keeps the colony alive around the clock. And perhaps you can feel the gentleness in that, the way even sleep is shared, the way rest is woven into the fabric of the whole, so that no one must stay awake forever. Further into the quiet mechanisms, there are ants who cooperate by producing antibiotics. Many species secrete antimicrobial compounds from glands in their bodies, and they spread these secretions through grooming, coating themselves and their nestmates in a thin chemical shield. This is social immunity, a collective defense against disease that depends on every worker contributing her secretions and receiving those of others. The more workers in a colony, the more diverse the chemical library, and the more effective the protection. In leafcutter colonies, workers also apply these secretions to the fungus garden, preventing contamination. The fungus, in turn, produces its own antimicrobials, which the ants ingest, gaining additional protection. It is a three-way cooperation. Ant, fungus, and the microbial community they collectively manage, all balanced in a delicate chemical equilibrium that has persisted for millions of years. And there is something quietly reassuring in knowing that cooperation can be a form of medicine, that communities can heal themselves through the simple act of sharing what they carry. Gently beyond that healing, there are ants who cooperate by building traps. Certain species construct pitfall traps near their nest entrances, small depressions or tunnels that funnel prey toward waiting workers. The trap itself is a collective work, dug and maintained by many individuals over days or weeks. When prey falls in, multiple workers swarm to subdue it, each contributing bites, stings, or simply body weight. The prey is then transported back to the nest, dismembered and distributed. No single ant could dig the trap, catch the prey, or carry it home, but together, the sequence unfolds smoothly. This is cooperation as predation, as the collective transformation of the environment into a tool, and the collective use of that tool to secure resources. And perhaps there is something fascinating in seeing how cooperation extends even into hunting, how the same mechanisms that build and nurture can also capture and consume, because survival requires both. Further still, there are ants who cooperate by fermenting food. Some species store seeds in underground chambers where humidity and microbial activity cause them to germinate slightly, breaking down tough starches into simpler sugars. The ants then harvest these partially sprouted seeds, gaining more nutrition than they would from dry seeds alone. They do not understand fermentation, but they have learned, through evolutionary trial and error, to create conditions where it happens. This is cooperation with microbes, with time, with the invisible processes that transform matter. The ants are brewers, in a sense, patient and unwitting, letting chemistry do the work while they wait. And there is something restful in that patience, in the willingness to let time and tiny organisms do what force and speed cannot. Quietly beside that fermentation, there are ants who cooperate by navigating using the Earth's magnetic field. Certain species, particularly those that nest underground or in dense forests where visual landmarks are scarce, have magnetoreceptive cells that allow them to sense the planet's magnetic orientation. This helps them maintain straight foraging paths and return home accurately. But the magnetic sense is not used in isolation. It is integrated with visual cues, olfactory trails, and memory, creating a multi-layered navigation system. Workers share information about routes through tandem runs and pheromone trails, effectively pooling their sensory experiences. The colony's collective knowledge of the landscape is far more detailed and reliable than any individual's, and this knowledge is maintained and updated continuously through cooperative exploration. And there is something quietly marvelous in imagining ants as tiny compasses, feeling the pull of the earth itself, and using that ancient signal to find their way home together. Further into the sensory world, there are ants who cooperate by farming algae. In tropical regions, some arboreal ants cultivate algae in specialized chambers within their carton nests. The algae grow on the inner walls, nourished by light filtering through the thin nest material and by nutrients from ant waste. The ants do not eat the algae directly, but the algae stabilize humidity, reduce temperature fluctuations, and may even produce oxygen that benefits the colony. In return, the ants protect the algae from grazers and provide a stable environment. This is cooperation across kingdoms again, a partnership so subtle it was only recently discovered, hidden in the walls of nests that researchers had examined for decades without noticing the green tint of algae quietly thriving within. And perhaps there is something soothing in knowing that cooperation can be so quiet, so unobtrusive, that it hides in plain sight, doing its work without fanfare or recognition. Gently beyond that hidden partnership, there are ants who cooperate by creating sound together. Certain species drum their abdomens against the ground or nest walls to produce vibrations that communicate alarm, recruitment, or coordination. When one ant drums, others nearby may join in, amplifying the signal so it travels further through the substrate. This is cooperative communication, a chorus of tiny percussionists sending messages through the earth itself. The rhythm and intensity of the drumming convey different meanings, and workers learn to distinguish these patterns through experience. It is a language of vibration, older than airborne sound, a way of speaking that requires the cooperation of many to be heard by all. And there is something quietly beautiful in imagining the ground beneath a nest humming with these tiny drum beats, a conversation carried through soil and stone, felt rather than heard. Further still, there are ants who cooperate by sharing heat in the cold. In temperate regions, colonies that overwinter must survive months of freezing temperatures. Workers cluster tightly around the queen and brood, forming a living insulation layer. Those on the outside of the cluster gradually rotate inward, so no individual bears the cold for too long. The cluster itself generates a small amount of metabolic heat, and this heat is trapped and shared by the density of bodies. The ants do not shiver. They do not move much at all. They simply press together, and in that collective stillness, they survive the winter. When spring arrives, the cluster loosens and life resumes. This is cooperation as endurance, as the willingness to huddle and wait, to share warmth and stillness until the world becomes kind again. And perhaps you can feel the comfort in that image. The way bodies press together can create safety. The way cooperation can be as simple as staying close when the cold comes. Quietly beside that warmth, there are ants who cooperate by producing light. Certain bioluminescent fungi are cultivated by ants in some tropical species, not for food, but possibly for illumination or as a byproduct of fungal metabolism. The glow is faint, visible only in complete darkness, but it may help ants navigate within the deepest chambers of their nests. The relationship is still poorly understood, but it represents another layer of cooperation, another partnership where ants and fungi exchange services in ways that benefit both. The ants provide a home and nutrients. The fungi provide light, or chemicals, or stability. It is a quiet glow in the dark, a gentle reminder that cooperation can illuminate even the most hidden places. And there is something deeply calming in that. the idea of tiny lights in the earth, tended by creatures who do not know they are gardeners of luminescence. Further into the cooperative landscape, there are ants who build floating islands. Fire ants, when floodwaters rise, do not panic. They gather together, linking legs and mandibles, and form a living raft that can float for days or even weeks. The raft is layered with brood and the queen protected in the center, workers forming the buoyant outer shell. The ants on the bottom layer are submerged, but they rotate with those above, so no individual drowns. The raft drifts until it finds dry land, and then the colony disembarks and rebuilds. This is cooperation as survival architecture, as the transformation of bodies into a vehicle, a shelter, a hope. The raft is not designed by any individual. It emerges from the collective response to water, from the simple rule, hold on to each other. And perhaps there is something profoundly moving in that. The way cooperation can turn disaster into a journey, the way holding on to each other can be enough to survive the flood. Gently beyond that survival, there are ants who cooperate by creating treaties. In some environments, multiple ant species coexist in close proximity, and rather than constant warfare, they establish territories through ritualized combat or chemical boundaries. Workers patrol borders, and when they encounter rivals, they engage in displays of aggression, threatening postures, or brief skirmishes, but rarely lethal battles. Over time, the boundaries stabilize, and both colonies benefit from reduced conflict and energy expenditure. This is cooperation through restraint, through the mutual recognition that endless war serves no one. It is not peace, exactly, but it is a managed tension, a cooperative agreement to limit violence and focus energy elsewhere. And there is something quietly wise in that, the recognition that even rivals can cooperate by agreeing not to destroy each other. That competition does not always require annihilation. Further still, there are ants who cooperate by recycling their dead. In some species, the bodies of dead workers are not simply discarded, but dismantled and fed to larvae. The proteins and nutrients are reclaimed, nothing wasted. This is cooperation across the boundary of life and death, a recognition that even in death, an individual can nourish the next generation. There is no ceremony, no mourning, but there is a quiet efficiency, a closing of the loop. The dead become the living, and the colony continues. And perhaps there is something restful in that cycle, in the knowledge that nothing is truly lost, that every body returns to the whole, transformed but not gone. Quietly beside that recycling, there are ants who cooperate by creating microbial gardens in their own bodies. Some species harbor bacteria in specialized glands or gut chambers, and these bacteria produce enzymes or antibiotics that the ants cannot produce themselves. The ants provide the bacteria with a safe environment and nutrients, and the bacteria provide chemical services. This is endosymbiosis, cooperation at the cellular level, a partnership so intimate that the bacteria are passed from queen to offspring, generation after generation, becoming part of the colony's inheritance. And there is something quietly profound in recognizing that cooperation happens not just between individuals, but within them, in the invisible partnerships that make life possible. Further into the cooperative web, there are ants who farm other insects for their defensive chemicals. Certain ants tend beetles or other arthropods that produce toxins, and the ants harvest these toxins for their own use, coating their bodies or storing the chemicals for defense. The tended insects are protected and fed, and the ants gain access to chemical weapons they could not produce themselves. It is mutualism as arms trade, cooperation as shared defense, and it blurs the line between farming and partnership. And perhaps there is something fascinating in seeing how cooperation can extend even into the realm of chemistry, how life shares not just food and shelter, but the very molecules of survival. Gently beyond that chemistry, there are ants who cooperate by creating humidity through their breath. In dry environments, workers gather in chambers and exhale moisture, raising the local humidity to levels suitable for brood development. They do not drink extra water for this purpose. They simply redirect their metabolic moisture, collectively humidifying the air through the simple act of respiration. It is cooperation as atmosphere, as the collective creation of a livable environment from the byproducts of living. And there is something quietly beautiful in that. The way even breathing can be a form of giving, the way life itself can be shared in the air between bodies. Further still, there are ants who cooperate by creating acoustic chambers. Some species dig nest chambers with specific shapes and sizes that amplify vibrations, making it easier to communicate through drumming or stridulation. The chambers act as resonators, and workers learn which chambers to use for which signals. This is architecture as communication tool, cooperation as the shaping of space to enhance the flow of information. And perhaps there is something soothing in imagining these tiny concert halls beneath the earth, shaped by countless small decisions, each one contributing to a system where messages travel further and clearer because of the space itself. Quietly beside that architecture, there are ants who cooperate by creating emergency exits. Many nests have multiple entrances and exits, and workers maintain these openings even when they are not regularly used. In the event of a flood, fire, or predator attack, these secondary exits allow rapid evacuation. The maintenance of unused tunnels is a form of cooperative insurance, a collective investment in future safety. No individual worker knows when or if the emergency exit will be needed, but the colony maintains it anyway, because cooperation includes planning for disasters that may never come. And there is something quietly reassuring in that. The way cooperation can be an act of hope, a preparation for the worst that trusts in the possibility of survival. Further into the realm of cooperation, there are ants who build living bridges that last for hours. Army ants, when crossing gaps in the forest canopy, form bridges of their own bodies. And these bridges remain in place as long as traffic flows across them. Workers lock legs and mandibles, creating a stable span, and thousands of their sisters walk across them, carrying food, brood, or nothing at all. The bridge ants are not permanently stuck. They can detach and rejoin the march if the bridge is no longer needed. The decision to form or dismantle a bridge is collective, based on traffic flow and the geometry of the gap. It is cooperation as infrastructure, as the willingness to become a road so others can travel. And perhaps you can feel the quiet generosity in that. The way some individuals hold still so others can move forward, and how that stillness is not sacrifice, but participation. Gently beyond those bridges, there are ants who cooperate by sharing immune responses. When one worker is exposed to a pathogen, her immune system produces antimicrobial compounds, and she shares these compounds with nestmates through grooming and trophallaxis. This primes the immune systems of other workers, creating a form of social vaccination. The colony's immune response is faster and stronger because individuals share their defenses, because exposure in one body becomes protection for many. And there is something quietly hopeful in that. The way immunity can be a collective property, the way one body's encounter with danger can become the whole colony's preparation. Further still, there are ants who cooperate by creating thermal refuges. In fire-prone ecosystems, some ants dig deep chambers far below the surface, where temperatures remain stable even during wildfires. When fire sweeps through, workers retreat to these refuges with the queen and brood, and they wait. The fire passes. The surface is scorched, but deep below, the colony survives, and when the ground cools, they emerge and rebuild. This is cooperation as resilience, as the collective foresight to dig deeper than necessary, to prepare for catastrophes that come rarely but devastatingly. And perhaps there is something deeply calming in knowing that even in the face of fire, cooperation can create pockets of safety, deep and cool and patient, waiting for the world to heal. Quietly beside that resilience, there are ants who cooperate by creating living barricades. When a nest entrance is threatened, workers pile up at the opening, forming a dense blockade of bodies. Predators or rivals must fight through this living wall, and the workers on the front line fight fiercely, often dying in the process. But their sacrifice buys time for others to evacuate the brood or for reinforcements to arrive. The barricade is not planned by any general. It forms spontaneously from the collective response to threat, each worker adding her body to the wall because the chemical signals tell her to. And there is something quietly solemn in that. The way cooperation can include the willingness to stand in the way of harm, to become a shield, not from bravery, but from belonging. Further into the cooperative patterns, there are ants who farm fungi that produce sedatives. Some fungal cultivars grown by leafcutters produce compounds that calm the ants, reducing aggression and promoting cooperative behavior. The ants ingest these compounds as they tend the garden, and the chemicals subtly shape their interactions, making the colony more harmonious. The fungus benefits from reduced conflict among its caretakers, and the ants benefit from smoother cooperation. It is a chemical partnership, a mutualism that operates on mood and behavior, shaping the social fabric through molecules. And perhaps there is something soothing in imagining that the way cooperation can be chemically encouraged, the way even mood can be a shared resource, cultivated and tended like a garden. Gently beyond that cultivation, there are ants who cooperate by creating time capsules. Some species store seeds or food in chambers that are sealed and left untouched for years. These caches serve as emergency reserves, accessed only when other resources fail. The workers who create these caches may never see them used. Future generations, facing scarcity, will break the seals and find sustenance waiting. This is cooperation across time, a gift from the past to the future, given without expectation of recognition or reward. And there is something quietly moving in that. The way cooperation can reach forward through time, the way the work of today can become the salvation of tomorrow, even if those who work never know. Further still, there are ants who cooperate by creating sound maps. As workers explore their environment, they drum and stridulate, and the echoes and vibrations they receive back give them information about the density and structure of the substrate. Over time, the colony builds a collective acoustic map of the area, shared through repeated interactions and chemical trails. This map is not stored in any individual, but in the patterns of movement and communication across many workers. It is a distributed memory, a cooperative knowledge that exists only in the network. And perhaps there is something quietly profound in that. The way knowledge can be a collective property, held by no one and everyone, existing in the spaces between minds. Quietly beside that knowledge, there are ants who cooperate by creating living thermostats. Workers in some species sense temperature gradients and move brood toward optimal zones, but they also adjust their own metabolic rates collectively to stabilize nest temperature. When it is too cold, they increase activity, generating heat. When it is too hot, they reduce activity and spread out, allowing heat to dissipate. The nest temperature is regulated not by any central system, but by the aggregate decisions of thousands of individuals, each responding to local conditions. And there is something deeply restful in recognizing that even temperature, even the warmth of a home, can be a cooperative creation built from the small adjustments of many. Further into the final quiet patterns of this section, there are ants who cooperate by dreaming, if dreaming is defined as neural activity during rest. Recent studies suggest that ants, during their brief sleep periods, may consolidate memories, processing the day's experiences into learned behaviors. If this is true, then even rest is cooperative, because the knowledge gained by one ant during sleep can be shared with others when she wakes through tandem runs, pheromones, or simply by performing tasks more efficiently. Sleep becomes not an absence of cooperation, but another form of it, a quiet internal process that strengthens the colony's collective intelligence. And perhaps you can feel the gentleness in that, the way even sleep, even the stillness of rest, contributes to the whole. The way every moment, waking or dreaming, is woven into the fabric of cooperation that holds the colony together. And so we arrive, gently, at the softer edges of this quiet journey through cooperation and the patient, persistent world of ants. You've traveled through chambers and tunnels, across chemical trails and living bridges, into the slow rhythms of colonies that breathe and think without a single mind commanding them. The facts have moved through you like a gentle current, and now, as we begin to draw this exploration toward rest, we can let the details soften, let the images blur slightly at their edges, and simply hold the warmth of what cooperation means when it is woven into the very fabric of life. There is something deeply restful about understanding that cooperation does not require effort in the way we sometimes imagine it. Among ants, there are no meetings, no negotiations, no debates about fairness or contribution. There is only response. A pheromone arrives, and a worker follows. A larva signals hunger, and food is delivered. A threat emerges, and bodies move toward it or away from it, depending on what the colony needs. This is cooperation without the weight of decision, without the burden of choice. It simply is. And perhaps that is why these small lives, unfolding in darkness beneath our feet, can bring such quiet comfort. They remind us that complexity can emerge from simplicity, that order does not require control, that a colony of millions can function as one without any single ant knowing the whole. Each individual moves through its small world, responding to what it encounters, and from those countless tiny responses, something vast and coherent takes shape. The colony does not plan its future in the way we might. It does not set goals or imagine outcomes, and yet it adapts. It learns. It remembers. When a food source appears, trails form. When danger threatens, defenses mobilize. When a nest floods, a raft assembles. When the queen ages, successors are already being raised. All of this happens through the slow accumulation of chemical signals, tactile exchanges, and behavioral thresholds that shift like tides in response to the colony's needs. There is no anxiety in this system. No ant worries whether it is doing enough, whether others are contributing fairly, whether the future is secure. Each ant simply does what its body tells it to do, what the pheromones around it suggest, what the temperature and humidity and presence of sisters indicate. And from this emerges not chaos, but harmony, not competition, but cooperation, not isolation, but profound, invisible connection. We have seen how ants share food mouth to mouth, how they carry each other's young, how they build living structures from their own bodies. We have watched them tend gardens of fungus, herd insects for honeydew, and cultivate relationships with plants that house and feed them. We have observed them teaching one another through tandem runs, vaccinating their siblings with controlled pathogen exposure, and adjusting the climate of their nests with the precision of engineers. All of this without language as we know it. All of this without consciousness as we experience it. All of this through cooperation so fundamental it requires no thought at all. And quietly, as you rest here, you might notice that cooperation exists in your own body in much the same way. Your cells do not deliberate. Your neurons do not debate. Your heart does not question whether to beat. And yet here you are, breathing softly, thoughts drifting, body held together by the silent cooperation of trillions of living parts. each responding to chemical signals, each contributing to the whole without knowing the whole exists. You are, in a sense, a colony, a superorganism, a living system where cooperation is so deep it becomes invisible. The ants remind us that we are not separate from this pattern. We are part of it. Our ancestors, like theirs, learned that survival is easier together. That shared effort yields shared benefit. That what seems like sacrifice from one angle is simply the movement of energy through a system, nourishing the whole so the whole can nourish the parts. This is not poetry. This is biology. This is the quiet truth that runs through every living system that has endured. There is something especially soothing about the timelessness of it all. Ants have been cooperating for more than 100 million years. They were here long before humans walked upright, long before mammals dominated the land, long before flowers covered the earth in color. They watched the dinosaurs disappear. They survived ice ages and volcanic winters and continental shifts. And through it all, they simply continued doing what they do, responding, adapting, cooperating, building small worlds in the dark. Their success is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. There are no ant monuments, no records of great ant leaders, no stories passed down through generations. There is only the steady hum of life continuing, colonies splitting and founding and growing and declining and splitting again, an endless cycle of cooperation that requires no recognition, no reward, no meaning beyond its own persistence. And perhaps that is the most restful fact of all. That meaning is not required. That cooperation does not need to be understood to be effective. That life continues not because it has a purpose, but because it has a pattern, and the pattern works. We have explored so many variations of that pattern. The honeypot ants with their living storage jars, bodies swollen with nectar, hanging motionless in the dark for months or years, waiting to be called upon. The leafcutter ants with their underground farms, tending fungus that digests leaves they cannot eat themselves, a partnership millions of years old. The weaver ants stitching leaves together with silk from their own larvae, building nests in the canopy that sway with the wind. The army ants that carry no permanent home, that flow across the forest floor like a living river, their nest made of their own interlocked bodies, protecting the queen and young at the center. Each species has found its own expression of cooperation, its own way of turning individual limitation into collective strength. Some farm, some herd, some weave, some build towers that breathe, some create rafts that float, some form bridges that span gaps, some dig cities that stretch for miles underground. And all of it happens through the same basic mechanism: chemical communication, behavioral thresholds, and the simple, patient accumulation of small actions into large outcomes. There is no competition within the colony for status or recognition. Workers do not vie for the queen's attention. Foragers do not boast of their finds. Soldiers do not seek glory. Each ant is, in a sense, anonymous, replaceable, and yet also essential, because the colony is not the queen alone, nor any single worker, but the whole living system, the network of relationships and exchanges and responses that connects them all. When a forager dies, another takes its place. When a tunnel collapses, another is dug. When a food source is depleted, new trails are explored. The colony absorbs loss and adapts to change not through planning or mourning, but through the same steady responsiveness that governs all its actions. There's a kind of resilience in this that feels almost like wisdom, though it requires no thought. A resilience that comes from distribution, from redundancy, from the fact that no single ant holds essential knowledge or irreplaceable skill. And this, too, is restful to consider, that a system can be robust without being rigid. That flexibility can emerge from simple rules. That a colony can lose half its workers and still function, because the remaining workers simply adjust their thresholds take on new tasks, respond to the new balance of signals around them. There is no crisis, no panic, only recalibration. The system finds its new equilibrium and continues. We have seen how colonies make decisions collectively, how they choose nest sites through a process that resembles voting but requires no ballot, no count, no declaration of results. Scouts explore options. They return and signal the quality of what they found through the intensity of their recruitment. More scouts visit the better sites. More signals accumulate. And gradually, without any ant knowing the full picture, a consensus emerges. The colony moves, and the new nest is, statistically, likely to be a good one. Not perfect, but good enough, which is all that survival requires. This is decision-making without the burden of decision. No ant is responsible for the outcome. No ant can be blamed if the choice proves poor. The colony simply chose, in the way a river chooses its path, following the contours of the landscape, the gradient of information, the flow of feedback. And if the choice is wrong, the colony will choose again. There is no attachment to being right, only the patient willingness to respond to what is. We have watched ants teach each other through tandem running, a slow, patient process where one ant leads another to a food source, pausing frequently to allow the follower to learn landmarks, to memorize the route. This is teaching. This is knowledge transfer. And it happens between creatures with brains smaller than a grain of sand. The teacher gains nothing immediate from this investment of time, but the colony gains a new and formed forager. And so the behavior persists, because colonies that teach are more efficient than colonies that do not. And efficiency, over millions of years, becomes instinct. There is something moving about this. That teaching exists even here, in these tiny lives. That patience exists. That one ant will slow its own journey to help another learn. Not out of kindness, not out of conscious choice, but because the pattern of cooperation includes this too. Includes the transfer of information, the investment in others' competence, the recognition, however unconscious, that the colony's strength is the sum of its members' knowledge. We have explored the strange world of slave-making ants, where cooperation twists into something darker, where raiders steal pupae from other colonies and raise them as workers who serve their captors without resistance. This is cooperation exploited, hijacked by chemical mimicry and imprinting. The enslaved workers perform all the tasks they would have performed in their birth colony, but now they feed and care for a different queen, a different brood. They are not aware of the theft. They simply respond to the chemical signals around them, which tell them this is home. These are sisters. This is the colony worth serving. It is unsettling, perhaps, but also a reminder that cooperation is a tool, a strategy, and like all strategies, it can be exploited. The slave makers have found a way to benefit from others' cooperation without offering cooperation in return. They are parasites of the social system itself, and yet even they cooperate among themselves. Even raiding parties coordinate their attacks, share the stolen pupae, and work together to maintain the mixed colony. Cooperation at one level, exploitation at another. Nature is not moral. It simply is. And gently, we have seen cooperation extend beyond the colony, beyond the species. Ants and aphids, ants and caterpillars, ants and acacia trees, ants and fungi, ants and bacteria. Each relationship and negotiation written in chemistry, a balance of cost and benefit that has been refined over countless generations. The ants protect, and in return they are fed. The ants disperse seeds, and in return they are housed. The ants cultivate fungus, and in return the fungus breaks down, leaves the ants cannot digest. Each partner benefits. Each partner has been shaped by the relationship, and the relationship itself becomes a kind of extended cooperation, a web of mutual dependence that blurs the boundaries between individuals, between species, between what is self and what is other. This is cooperation at its most expansive, not just within a family, not just within a species, but across the living world. Ants have woven themselves into ecosystems so thoroughly that their removal would cascade through countless other lives. They aerate soil, disperse seeds, control pest populations, recycle nutrients, prune plants, pollinate flowers, and create habitat for hundreds of other species. They are in many ecosystems keystone species, not because they are large or fierce, but because they are everywhere, doing small essential things, cooperating not just with each other, but with the entire community of life around them. And all of this happens quietly, underground, under leaves, under bark, in the dark. Most of the cooperation that sustains the world is invisible. Most of the work that allows life to continue is done by small creatures we rarely notice, following patterns we rarely see, responding to signals we cannot detect. The ants are simply one thread in this vast tapestry, but they are a thread that touches many others, that holds parts of the pattern together, that allows other threads to exist. There's a kind of humility in this realization that the grand processes of ecology, the health of forests and grasslands and deserts, depend in part on the tiny actions of ants. That cooperation at the smallest scale supports complexity at the largest. That nothing is too small to matter. That every contribution, however modest, is part of the whole. We have seen how colonies regulate their own climate, creating underground chambers with stable temperature and humidity, even as the surface world swings between extremes. They do this through architecture, through behavior, through the collective management of airflow and moisture. Workers move deeper when it is hot, higher when it is cold, clustering or dispersing to adjust the thermal mass of the nest. They bring in water when humidity drops, seal in trances when it rises. They open vents, close tunnels, shift the brood to optimal zones. All of this without thermometers, without plans, without any ant understanding what temperature is. They simply respond to what they feel, and the colony as a whole maintains the conditions that life requires. This is engineering through emergence. No blueprint, no architect, no central control. Just thousands of ants making small adjustments in response to local conditions. And from those adjustments, a stable climate emerges. It is the same principle that governs all colony behavior. Local responses producing global patterns. Simple rules generating complex outcomes. And it works. It has worked for 100 million years. We have watched ants sleep, not all at once, but in shifts, each worker taking brief naps throughout the day and night, never leaving the colony unattended, never allowing vigilance to lapse. The queen sleeps more deeply, her rest protected by the wakefulness of her workers. And during sleep, memories consolidate. Foraging routes are strengthened. Nest layouts are encoded. The individual ant's experience becomes part of its long-term knowledge, and that knowledge shapes its future behavior, which in turn shapes the colony's collective response to the world. Even rest is cooperative. Even sleep serves the whole. There is no time when the colony is not functioning, no moment when all workers are absent. The continuous presence of awake, responsive ants means the colony is always ready, always adapting, always aware in its distributed, chemical way of what is happening around it and within it. We have explored the immune system of the colony, the social immunity that emerges when workers groom each other, removing spores and parasites, when they isolate sick individuals, when they incorporate low doses of pathogens into the fungus garden to prime the colony's defenses. This is vaccination. This is hygiene. This is public health at the scale of millimeters. And it works well enough that colonies can thrive in environments rich with fungi, bacteria, and parasites that would otherwise overwhelm them. The colony's health is not the sum of individual health, but an emergent property of social behavior. Workers sacrifice some safety by contacting pathogens, but the colony gains resistance. Sick ants remove themselves from the nest. reducing transmission. Even though isolation likely hastens their death, the individual suffers, but the collective benefits. And because the workers are sterile, because their genetic legacy depends entirely on the queen's survival, this sacrifice is, in evolutionary terms, self-interest. Protecting the colony is protecting their own genes, carried forward in their siblings and in the queen's future offspring. This is the logic of eusociality, the reason cooperation can become so extreme. When individuals do not reproduce, when their only genetic future lies in the success of their relatives, then helping the colony is helping themselves. There is no conflict between self and group. They are the same. And so cooperation can deepen to the point where it looks like altruism, like self-sacrifice, but is actually, from the gene's perspective, entirely selfish. It is a beautiful paradox, a place where the language of selfishness and selflessness breaks down, where the individual and the collective merge into a single evolutionary unit. We have seen ants create living architecture, not just nests, but bridges and rafts and chains and barricades, structures made from their own bodies, held together by hooked feet and mandibles, by the simple willingness to become part of something larger. An ant in a bridge is not foraging, not feeding, not tending brood. It is simply a structural element, a living brick waiting for others to cross. And it will hold that position for hours if necessary, because the colony needs the bridge, and the colony's need is encoded in the chemical signals that told the ant to stop here, to lock into place, to become part of the path. There is something almost meditative about this. The stillness of it, the patience. An ant holding position in a bridge, feeling the footsteps of hundreds of sisters crossing its back, contributing nothing but its own body, its own presence, to the collective task. It is cooperation reduced to its essence, being where you are needed, doing what is required, without question or hesitation or doubt. And when the bridge is no longer needed, the ants simply release and move on. The structure dissolves. The individuals return to other tasks. There is no ceremony, no recognition, no memory of the bridge that was. There is only the ongoing flow of colony life, the endless cycle of tasks and responses, of needs arising and being met, of cooperation manifesting in whatever form the moment requires. We have touched on the deep time of ant evolution, the 100 million years of refinement, the slow, patient testing of strategies through countless generations. What works persists, what fails disappears, and gradually, over eons, cooperation becomes more sophisticated, more flexible, more deeply embedded in the biology of the species. Pheromone glands become more complex, behavioral repertoires expand, caste systems diversify, symbioses deepen, and the colony as a superorganism becomes more integrated, more resilient, more capable of responding to a changing world. This is evolution as a kind of learning, a slow accumulation of solutions to the problem of survival. And the solution that ants found again and again across different lineages is cooperation. Not because it is noble, not because it is good, but because it works. Because a group that shares information can find food more efficiently than isolated individuals. Because a group that shares defense can deter predators that would overwhelm a lone ant. Because a group that shares labor can accomplish tasks no individual could attempt. The ants did not choose cooperation. Cooperation chose them. Or rather, the environment selected for those individuals whose genetic and behavioral traits made cooperation possible. And over time, those traits became fixed, became instinctive, became the foundation of a way of life that has proven extraordinarily successful. Ants are among the most abundant animals on Earth. Their biomass rivals that of humans. They are found on every continent except Antarctica, in nearly every terrestrial habitat. And all of this success flows from cooperation, from the simple fact that together they can do what alone they cannot. And now, as we begin to draw this long, quiet exploration toward its close, you might let yourself simply rest with that thought. That cooperation is not a burden. That is not a sacrifice. That it is, in fact, the foundation of resilience, of adaptability, of survival itself. That the most successful lives are not the most isolated, but the most connected. Not the most independent, but the most interdependent. Not the strongest alone, but the strongest together. The ants have shown us this in 1,000 small ways. Through their trails and their bridges, their gardens and their rafts, their teaching and their nursing, their climate control and their collective decisions. They have shown us that complexity does not require consciousness. That order does not require command. That a system can be intelligent without any individual being aware. That cooperation can be so deep, so fundamental, that it becomes invisible, woven into the very structure of life. And perhaps, as you lie here, thoughts softening, breath slowing, you can feel that same invisible cooperation holding you. The cooperation of your cells, your organs, your systems. The cooperation of the microbes in your gut, the bacteria on your skin, the mitochondria in your cells that were once independent organisms and are now part of you. You're not one thing. You are a colony, a walking, breathing ecosystem held together by cooperation so fundamental you never have to think about it. The boundary between self and other is not as clear as it seems. You are made of parts that cooperate. You are sustained by relationships with other species. You breathe oxygen produced by plants and plankton. You eat food grown in soil enriched by decomposers. You are part of a web of cooperation that extends across the entire living world, a web that includes the ants beneath your feet, the trees above your head, the fungi in the soil, the bacteria in the air, all of it connected, all of it cooperating in a broad sense, simply by existing, by cycling nutrients, by creating the conditions that allow other lives to continue. This is the largest fact of all, and the most restful. That life is not a competition, or rather, it is not only a competition, it is also always a collaboration, a vast, intricate, ongoing exchange of energy and matter and information, where every organism is both taking and giving, consuming and contributing, living and feeding the lives that will come after. The ants are part of this. You're a part of this. And understanding that, feeling that can bring a kind of peace, because it means you are not alone. You are not separate. You are held by a web of relationships that extends far beyond your awareness. Connections that sustain you without your effort, cooperation that requires nothing from you but your presence, your participation in the simple fact of being alive. And so, as this story comes gently to rest, you can let yourself rest too. Let the facts drift away. Let the images of ants and colonies and tunnels and trails soften into the background of your mind. They will still be there if you need them. The ants will still be cooperating, still building, still tending their gardens and their young, still following their chemical trails through the dark. They do not need your attention to continue. They will go on, as they have for 100 million years, patient and persistent and profoundly, invisibly connected. If you are still awake, still listening, there are other stories waiting, other quiet journeys through science and nature, other facts to drift through, other patterns to explore. But there is no urgency, no need to move on, no need to seek more. You can simply be here, breathing softly, held by the knowledge that cooperation is everywhere, that connection is fundamental, that you are part of something vast and ancient and ongoing. And if sleep is coming, you can welcome it. Let it arrive like a gentle tide, softening the edges of thought, dissolving the boundary between waking and dreaming. The ants will still be there in the morning, still cooperating, still showing us that the smallest lives can teach the deepest truths. That patience is powerful. That simplicity can generate complexity. That together is stronger than alone. You are safe here. The world is held together by a trillion quiet acts of cooperation, and you are one of them. Your breath is cooperation between lungs and air. Your heartbeat is cooperation between cells. Your thoughts are cooperation between neurons. And all of it happens without your effort, without your control, simply because cooperation is what life does. It is what life is. So rest now. Let the weight of your body settle. Let your thoughts slow and soften. Let the story of the ants become a gentle hum in the back of your mind, a reminder that cooperation is not something you must strive for, but something you already are, something you have always been, something that will continue long after this moment, long after this night, long after your own small life has contributed its part to the vast, ongoing pattern of existence. The ants are teaching us still, even now, even as you drift towards sleep. They are teaching us that rest is part of the cycle, that stillness is necessary, that even the busiest colony has moments of quiet, moments when workers sleep and the nest breathes softly in the dark. That activity and rest are not opposites, but partners, two aspects of the same process, the rhythm of life that pulses through every living system. So let yourself be part of that rhythm now. Let the activity of the day fall away. Let the questions and concerns and tasks fade into the background. Let yourself simply be here, in this moment, in this body, in this quiet space where nothing is required of you except to breathe, to rest, to allow sleep to come if it will. The story of cooperation continues, with or without your attention. The ants will keep building. The colonies will keep growing. The trails will keep forming. The world will keep turning, held together by countless invisible threads of connection, by the patient, persistent cooperation of lives too small to see and systems too large to comprehend. And you are part of it all. You always have been. You always will be. So rest now, gently, knowing that cooperation is holding you, that you're not alone, that the pattern continues, that life goes on quietly, patiently, cooperatively, in the dark and in the light, in the depths of the soil and the vastness of the sky, in the smallest ant and the largest ecosystem, in your own breath and heartbeat and the soft drift of your thoughts towards sleep. Rest now. The ants are cooperating. The world is turning, and you are safe, held by the same invisible web that holds all life, the web of connection and cooperation that has no beginning and no end, only the endless, patient continuation of existence itself. Rest.